I'm Hannah Bloch. I'm an international editor at NPR here in Washington. I worked in Pakistan a number of years ago now. I was there between 1996 and 2002. Had been thinking a lot about Pakistan, especially this week with the election, because the first big story that I covered when I arrived was the '97 election, and covered Imran Khan and his first bid for parliament. Was on the campaign trail with him in Lahore. I have to say, in those days, he didn't seem completely wholehearted. Others who were there at the time may or may not agree. But he's finally made it now, and it's going to be so interesting to see where things go under Imran Khan and his party. I had studied Urdu in Lahore as a student before I became a journalist. Before I got my Time magazine assignment, I was a science reporter for Time and worked here in the Washington Bureau as a general assignment reporter. And then they created a full-time correspondent position in Islamabad. People knew that I had studied Urdu with the Berkeley Urdu language program in Lahore. So I was offered the job, and I was thinking I would go for maybe a year or two. I ended up staying for 6. I wouldn't have stayed that long if I hadn't loved it, and I missed being a journalist there. I had the opportunity to work with some excellent journalists who were direct colleagues of mine with Time, including some big names now. Rahimullah Yousafzai was a colleague of mine in Peshawar, Talat Hussain. I felt that I learned a great deal from the Pakistani journalists who I knew and who I worked with. Even though I do speak Urdu, and certainly not very well anymore, I generally preferred to have somebody translating for me when I did interviews, because I didn't want to miss the nuance, and I was afraid if I miscommunicated something that wouldn't be a good thing. So it was interesting in some of the first interviews that I did. When someone would translate for me, I would notice that they weren't asking directly the question that I was asking, and I wondered what was going on. And I waited, and then I realized what was going on, and it was because I hadn't figured out the right first question to ask to get to the actual question that I wanted to ask. And so that was one of the first important lessons that I learned being a journalist in Pakistan. And if I hadn't known Urdu, I would probably not have understood that. So that was a great thing. I was asked to speak a bit about ethics today, and I think in sort of thinking about this question, I have always felt that Pakistani journalists were the bravest and the most dedicated professionals who I had worked with, and you guys have pressures from all sides. I don't need to tell you this. I mean, whether you're getting it from your own government, the security agencies, from criminals, from extremists, from Taliban, from your own bosses, you're working under extraordinary pressure. And I think, when we talk about ethics and ethical journalism, we kind of also have to talk about support, and what kind of support are you guys getting, and what kind of support do you all need? And I understand that a code of ethics was agreed to in Pakistan. There's a journalism code of ethics now, I think as of last year.
Yeah, code of ethics 2000. Yeah. They are basically media rules, and code of ethics were, I guess, launched in 2011. They were reviewed in 2011.
Yeah.
They were like Pamela laws in 2002. They're like there.
So that's a good step, and I know a lot of people were very anxious about that and the existence of such a thing. I would just say that kind of thing, it has to be a living thing. It has to be a living document. It can't just be sort of a dead piece of paper, a dead statement. It has to be connected to the real life conditions that you all are dealing with, and it has to, come with a level of support, whether that involves training, or other kinds of support that you might get in terms of ethics. And I would, be curious to hear more about the issues that you feel are of concern in the ethical realm these days. I mean, the media landscape is so different now than when I was a journalist there. I mean, and when I was a student there back in 1990, we're talking now, there was one TV channel, there was PTV, there was Radio Pakistan, there were a few newspapers, and certainly it's exploded since then, and it's made the landscape a lot more complicated. It's made some ethical questions probably more complicated too. So I'm going to leave it at that, and if you guys want to have a discussion or ask questions, talk more, I'm happy to talk ideas.
You were saying that there was only one PTV. Now I just want to say that
Sure.
we have number of PTVs now.
Okay. I didn't even know that. There's PTV World, I guess,
Yeah.
but
It's pretty busy.
No, I'm talking about the media server.
Oh, I see, I see.
Yeah,
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 okay, okay,
government
yeah.
channels.
Yep, yeah, no, there are
Like Fox
many,
News.
many.
Like Fox News.
But I guess being a journalist, like Lisa was talking about, like most of the time we don't get access to information, and it's very important to get to that, to file a story and to know both sides of the coins. But I guess when a journalist is not provided with the ample of information, and they are not provided with a proper channel to get through that information, they will find an unethical way to do that.
Well, or an ethical way to do it. I mean, that's the thing about being a good journalist is
Yeah.
one way or another,
We
you will
have
always
to
find
go
a way,
through
so.
that. We have to find
Yeah.
ways. So either it is ethical or unethical, we just do it. So I don't know, like, I guess people should be friendly towards us. They should be friendly enough to share information, of course, but we're not asking for the top secrets, of course, that is like, but still, like, you can talk to us about stuff. But they'll talk to us behind the camera, they'll talk to us off the record, they won't talk to us on the record. Because I guess specifically in Pakistan, because I guess they have their own life threats, they have their own threats.
Well, that's the thing too, and you have to be so careful about that
Yeah.
as well, because you don't want to be putting your sources in any danger and putting them at risk, and that's something everybody has to be so aware of. It's sort of in the passion to get the story
Yeah,
and to
I
get it out in the world. There are limits to that as well.
This is not happening in Pakistan, but when we are working here for last 3 weeks,
Yeah.
we also saw that some people hesitate to being interviewed.
Most of the people.
Really?
So,
Yeah.
yes.
In
they-
what
they
in what
refuse-
context?
In every lesson.
In every,
Is that right?
We
Wow.
cover different kind of stories
Sure.
here with the correspondent of different channels. I was in Duluth, so people are it's not appropriate to come on the screen, and one lady said that my husband do not allow me to come.
Oh,
And she,
no,
she
really?
is not Muslim. She was not Muslim. She was not Pakistani.
She's
She was
right.
living here in Duluth. So
Wow.
hesitation is everywhere. We are here not to
So interesting.
always saying that Pakistan has this problem. So here is also people hesitating. Officials are not giving you the stance here too. So we have
Yeah,
to
she's right.
see the alternate. We did actually. Shorts. I just want to share one thing that we went there on flood area. We wanted to interview flood victim, but the victims were not ready to talk to us.
Yeah.
Because they said that the reason was that there was some insurance kind of thing that if your house is damaged above 50%, so you will get the insurance kind of thing. So they didn't know that if their house is 80% damaged or 50% damaged, but they were claiming for more. So they were not ready to talk about that, and we couldn't find
she's right.
any one victim. So what we did, we do the stand-up. Our reporters do the stand-up, and he shared his the letter of the insurance department and the fire department and whatever, and we cover the story.
Yeah,
So
this is
it's
the
yeah.
same, I guess. So I have been working in Alaska, and it's like very few people were living there. Like they don't have much populated. This is not a populated area. And there was a story like there is some residence place, and I did politics stuff there, but like most of the stories were related to crime as well. So there was a story, a man who hit a residential garage area, and there were a lot of kids and people living around, and they were complaining about this kid, like he's a very troublemaker person, and we are so much concerned about our security, our kids' security. He owns weapons and stuff and all that, but they were not ready to talk about it in front of camera. They're like, we don't want to talk in front of camera, but we are telling you.
Has
So,
anybody
I was
else
like-
had any such experiences that they
Yeah,
want to
this
share?
was the
And
thing.
that's a particular sort of challenge for journalists in
people-
TV.
yeah.
You know, it's different for a print journalist or even
I
a
think
radio
it's
Some people,
journalist.
they're
more
not
but-
easier
friendly to share information here. They're not that friendly.
I also-
In
Well,
Pakistan,
and you
they're
were,
friendly.
and I mean, you're so lucky to have been in Alaska,
Yeah.
which does not get many foreign correspondents, you know, if ever, and many US journalists are never gonna get to Alaska, so, I mean, I'm envious, I mean, but that's a very isolated area.
Yeah,
And as you know, I mean, it's really challenging to establish trust,
yeah.
you know, as a newcomer anywhere, but as a foreign correspondent in an isolated area, you know, where they probably don't have a lot of journalistic attention to establish trust, to start
Yeah,
making connections and doing that, that is very,
Well,
very tough in a short amount of time.
I interviewed Northwest Arctic mayor, and that area is like, you know, way far away from even the main anchorage in Alaska. And
Yeah,
he was like, I was just sitting at a restaurant and I saw a person and I like, he doesn't look like him, you know. He looks like a person who lives in the snow for so long. I was discussing it with my colleague and out of nowhere I got to know, oh my God, he's a mayor from that place. And that was such an interesting interview. He told us like how this year, he actually said that we, because we are near to Canada, so we are like more in connection with Canada rather than in United States. And I was like, okay, so that was something different for me, like,
yeah.
We have one question here, I think.
Sure.
I also have the same
Hi.
experience. I think everybody knows Sabika Sheik's incident in Texas, Houston. So we tried to contact her host father in Houston. First he agreed, and he just asked us to take permission from their parents in Pakistan. We also did that, and finally said it may be going to be a political issue. I'm not going to give any interview.
Oh my, yeah, people are nervous.
Yeah, we did that, but we wanted to take his point of view as well.
Sure.
But he was really insecure, and we did not force him.
It's so tough, and I think again, you know, being there for a relatively short amount of time, again, it's just, like if you were based there, or if you had a longer time, you would maybe have time to establish that trust,
Yes.
you know, and sort of maybe, you know, come to a different outcome, but it's so
Even we
hard,
tried that
yeah.
it's not a political issue. Actually, we want to say that America is a safe place. It was just merely an incident there, but he said no because it is going to be a political issue.
Very, very tough.
These are the some crime or serious issues. I face some challenge like the kids athletic club. When I go and went there and want to make a film there, but unfortunately the director of the athletic club, he just said it is not allowed to make the kids movie. I said why? How can I make my report then? No, firstly we will get the permission from their parents, and then you can make their films.
That
Because
sounds
they
familiar,
have some
that's true here
privacy
too.
laws,
Yep.
that's why they stopped me to make the
Yep.
film.
but I
Very,
had a
very
very
true
different
here. Yep.
experience.
Yep.
I was, because I was doing the politics stuff, and I was filing the stories, like 2-3 stories per day, and one of my co-political correspondents, she actually lost like 30 of her followers because of me. Because like people were commenting on our stories and saying like, why are you putting this Muslim girl all the time on TV? And like,
Wow.
why she's here? And she actually lost her 30 followers on Twitter, like, why are you dressing up like this and all that stuff. So
Wow.
that was like a bit of, I guess it's everywhere. It's like not even in, we call people of Pakistan, we call people in Pakistan, they're like extremists, and like it's the same, I guess. Here.
We have a question.
There are parallels, yeah.
We have one question.
Hi.
So you just you just shared that whenever you were when you were not very when you had not learned Urdu, your questions would be translated when you wanted to interview diplomats. So
Or anybody, not just diplomats.
Yeah, anybody. So
Ordinary people.
would your questions be twisted or lost in translation, or they were broken down into parts in order to get
No,
to the
yeah,
point?
they were definitely not lost in translation. What was happening was that it was a line of questioning that hadn't occurred to me as an American. So as an American, you have a certain way, when you've been trained as a journalist here, of sort of approaching an interview, approaching a subject. And that doesn't always work in an international context. So it was more, you know, I think to get to the important questions that really were the heart of the story that I was looking for, it wasn't a straight line, where as an American journalist I had been trained to kind of think of it in a pretty linear way, you know, ask A, B, and C. So it was maybe a much more roundabout way of getting exactly to the points that I wanted to, but not in the way that I had initially planned. And I learned a lot about, you know, sort of being a journalist, being a better journalist overall, not just being a journalist in Pakistan, but just being a better, I think, more sensitive and more aware journalist. They're just very different ways of doing it, yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned about the ethics. So for instance, as a journalism student, we are taught ethics, but when you go in the field, or mostly do with broadcasting media in Pakistan, our editors tell us to forget about the ethics because ethics are not laws, right? So you cannot hold someone accountable, even though you should practice it. I just want to know how it works in the US newsrooms over here.
So most U.S. newsrooms are very conscious of ethics. Certainly the newsroom that I work in now is hugely conscious of ethics because we are public radio, we are publicly funded, it's donations by listeners, there's a little bit of federal government money that comes in. So we have this responsibility to the audience. We've got a really clear code of ethics and it's available to the public on our website. It's not just, you know, for us to look at. We are constantly interrogating ourselves. How can we do this better? Where did we go wrong? There's guidance coming out pretty much every week, I would say, for NPR reporters and editors and producers on use of language. You know, so we had great sort of discussions and debates at the time that President Trump first came into office, because all the American news organizations were sort of debating, do we say what some of his statements are as lies? Do we call it a lie? Do we state it as something else? Is it a misstatement of fact? Is it? And we ended up, in most cases, coming down on the side of not calling it an outright lie because we felt that was a judgment to his intention, which we didn't know. We couldn't get inside his head. But these are the kinds of conversations, you know, about ethics and about usage that, you know, we're just having all the time. And I think NPR may be unusual in terms of newsrooms in this sort of constant interrogation of these things, but I think to some extent or other it's going on in most US newsrooms. I mean, whether it's visible to reporters or not, I think, you know, any honest newsroom is going to be having these questions and these discussions and debates, and hopefully it leads somewhere good. Yeah.
Then the White House came up with the word, it's alternative facts.
We don't have to use the White House for
At least tell me, you lived in Pakistan for quite a few years.
Yeah.
Did you receive any call, or your editors or the bosses, did you receive any call from the politician or the military circles? I mean, you definitely doesn't have, such kind of call while in US, while you are working in US newsroom. I mean, the infrastructure, the entire setup is so different from that of Pakistan. And the second thing, also tell me, Anwar Saab, earlier, you were saying that his colleague, she was offered a marriage proposal. Even in the first meeting with the government, did you receive any kind of such proposal? Even you lived for so many years.
That would be telling. Yeah, no, I didn't receive any sort of blatant marriage proposal as such. Not that I recall anyway. There were sort of amusing things that happened along the way, sort of mistaken identity. When I was covering the election in '97, I was traveling with Benazir Bhutto at that time, and I was in a car behind her, but my car, we got out of the car first, and people started throwing rose petals at me when I came out of the car. Anyway, to your first question, were there phone calls from Pakistani authorities? I'm trying to think if there was a very strange episode toward the end of my time in 2002. It's a few months before I left Pakistan. A diplomat a Pakistani diplomat in an Asian country got, I think my boss, my editor in Asia was going to get a visa. And he encountered this Pakistani diplomat who then accused me of, let's see, I'm gonna get this right, I haven't thought about this in a long time. So this diplomat said to my boss, who was coming to Pakistan because we wanted to get an interview with General Musharraf, so this diplomat said to my boss something like, does General Musharraf like Hannah Bloch? And and my boss said, well, I guess, I don't know. And the diplomat said, well, I don't think that's true because we've heard that Hannah Bloch was trying to scale a wall in the tribal areas and break and enter into a house. And so then my boss called me very upset and agitated and saying, is this true? You know, speaking of ethics. And I said, absolutely not true. Like, try to imagine that. How would that even work? Like, high wall, like, what? Like, how is that even possible? So that's kind of, anyway, and we cleared it up and he got his visa and we got the interview with General Musharraf and everything was fine. But it was just such an odd episode and just kind of came out of nowhere for me. So that's the only thing that comes to mind right now. There probably are others that I have blocked out.
Thank you.
Thank you.